I'm going to present some information that's a little bit different because the focus of this morning was really, or not this morning, but just a little while ago, was really in terms of a health perspective about the overabundance of food in the United States and its health consequences. And one of the things that I want to consider is an equally challenging problem, one that maybe people don't realize is a problem so much in the United States, which is groups of people, pockets of populations who actually don't have enough access to food. And I want to consider today the question of whether or not college students can be lumped into that population. A lot of the nutrition research on college students, for instance, everyone's heard of the freshman 15. That research began in the early 80s. It's pretty much since been debunked. The freshman 15 is not a real thing. Some people gain weight when they come to college, other people lose weight when they come to college. There's no standard trajectory of weight gain for the average college student. But the long time thought about college was that when people came to when people came to college, their general health tended to increase. That's what we believed. They had greater access to services oftentimes than they had in their own home environments, and the college would act as a safety net. Now, other health issues emerge for college students like binge drinking, drug experimentation, sexually transmitted diseases. However, a lot of the major health issues faced by young adults in the United States, the burden, we thought, was mostly on the your friends who didn't go to college. This study, which we actually did here right at William Paterson last semester, we're not done with it analyzing it yet. We did finish the initial analysis yesterday, because we just got the data in, was done here among a group of William Paterson college students to really ask this question: are there pockets of students, college students, who are food insecure? And food insecurity really is about the idea, and many of you know that this is research I did when I lived in Africa, because many of you were in class with me before. This is something I used to do a long, long time ago. Food insecurity is all about this idea that people don't have access to adequate food, or if they have access, they don't know how to adequately prepare it. Food insecurity has four major sort of subgroups that we measure: the availability of the food, whether or not people have access to the food. Just because it's available doesn't mean people can actually access it. You need resources in order to access it. Whether or not people utilize the food that they have access, particularly in a way that promotes health, and how stable that food is over time. And in the United States, when we think about stability over time, we think about seasonality. The question of, are some foods more available during some parts of the year? And does that put some populations at greater risk because they have less availability during certain seasons? So when we measure food insecurity, it's not an easy thing to do. We have to consider how we're measuring all four of those aspects of food availability. And in the United States, we use the USDA as our sort of benchmark organization for the idea of whether or not populations of people have access to enough food. The United States Department of Agriculture does periodic measurements of food insecurity in the United States. They do a large-scale study every 5 years, and they do smaller studies in the most food insecure places in between those 5-year periods. And they use a bunch of primary tools. The two most common tools that the USDA uses include an 18-item self-report, so people are reporting about their own households, survey, which yields the best, most accurate results. However, if the USDA decides they want to survey populations that largely do not include children, it's acceptable to use the 10-item self-report survey, because all of the items, the survey questions that have to do specifically with children, are taken out. So these are the two most common used ways to measure food insecurity, but there are others. There's actually a 6-item module. There's a module for children only that schools use. There are about 6 or 7 other modules, but these are the two most commonly used. If we were to look at the last nationwide study of food insecurity in the United States, what we would find is that study found that about 14% of the US population live in food insecure households, meaning they don't fit any qualification to become food secure, to be considered food secure. And that may not seem like a large number to you, 14%, but it actually represents millions of people when you think about the population of the United States. And in fact, among that 14%, there is this very significant group of almost 6% who qualify as very low food insecurity. And these are the people at most risk for nutritional deficiency diseases that you probably didn't think existed in the United States anymore. Things like rickets and beriberi, kwashiorkor, which we think of as a protein deficiency disease that we only see in the developing world, but in fact there are places in the South and in West Virginia and in other places where small children have those distended bellies, you know those, because they are actually dying of hunger. The USDA does this really nice map by county of where the food secure and food insecure counties are in the United States. And the darker the green, the more food insecure households there are. And as you can see, there are two areas of the country that seem most at risk for food insecurity, the Southeast and the Southwest. There are pockets in other places. But what's interesting, and I know most of you in the room have public health background, what's most interesting is this map could look like a map of a lot of other things that we study, couldn't it? If we looked at childhood mortality, same thing. Diabetes, obesity, childhood obesity, heart disease, all of these same conditions are seen predominantly in these same areas. And if you look at the most food secure places, the Midwest and the Northeast, they often are also healthiest areas on all of those same indicators. Bless you. If we were to break this, oh, actually, remind me, what was the rate of food insecurity across the whole United States?
15%.
14%, right. So if we look at New Jersey specifically, we see that we're just under that. New Jersey's rate of food insecurity is 13%. But that should alarm us because it's still over 1 million people in New Jersey that are food insecure. And what's really interesting about this is we can look at the same map of New Jersey. And in New Jersey, there are 5 counties where people have greater than 14% food, where more than 14% of the households have food insecurity. We see 2 of the large, more rural counties in the south part of the state, and then we see 3 counties up here in northern New Jersey, with Essex County actually having the highest rate of food insecurity. And what county is William Paterson in? Can anybody tell me? William Paterson's in Passaic County, and it's rated as one of the top 5 food insecure counties in New Jersey. And that's really interesting to me because it comes back to that original question of, are college students a population we need to be worried about? So last semester we did a study, and this study was largely informed first on my interest in food insecurity from many years ago, but by 2 articles that came out last year in the popular press. One in the Washington Post and one in MSNBC, which said that American college students are hungry, that there are large populations of college students that don't have access to the right foods or enough food. And in one of the articles, there was this really interesting table that indicated the number of college campuses in the United States that had set up food banks or quote-unquote soup kitchens for college students. As of 2007, there was only 1 college in the United States that actually had a food bank on campus. 7 years later, there were 121 colleges that recognized that this was a big enough problem to create food banks on campus. And remember, we thought college students were protected against this because of the fact that they were in college and there were lots of resources available to them. So we looked a little bit at the literature because we didn't want to create a study that had already been done, and we found that there are only 3 studies done on college campuses about food insecurity. The first one was published in 2009, and it was a study done in Hawaii. And this study was done on about 450 college students. They used that 6-item, the very short USDA questionnaire I was talking about before, and they found that about 21% of the respondents were food insecure and another 24% were at risk. So close to 50% of the students in this population were at some level of risk for food insecurity. And there were some populations at higher risk. I see that. Those living on campus or off campus with roommates, and those that were Hawaiian, Filipino, or other Pacific Islanders. 2 other studies were done, a study in Australia and they found rates of food insecurity between 13 and 46%. They also had a number of variables that they saw that were associated with it. And the latest study in Oregon, also using the 6-item food insecurity scale, they found that 60% of the students were food insecure, with lots of other variables that were related. So what did it look like here at William Paterson? We had the largest sample ever, 705, larger than all three other studies. A great mix of class years, a relatively similar mix of male to female, and across the board self-reported health status. We haven't done a final analysis yet, so I can only share with you the results of 5 questions that we asked. One of them was whether or not people had enough of the kinds of foods they wanted to eat. 37% of your classmates, or you if you answered the survey, scored as food insecure. The next question, whether or not people were worried their food would run out, 30% were food insecure in the last year. I couldn't afford to eat balanced meals, 33% were food insecure. So these numbers are significant. As the survey goes on, it asks more specific and more intense questions. The next question was, were you ever hungry enough because there wasn't enough money to eat? Now this is a much more severe indicator of food insecurity. The answer was 15%. So it's a little bit lower, but that's higher level of severe food insecurity. And then the question that indicates the most amount of severe food insecurity is, did you ever lose weight because you didn't have enough money to eat? And actually 8% of our students said that they did. So this is we think, an important study because it has the largest sample size of any of the college studies. We used the 10-item, the more accurate survey than the other college studies did. We measured 20 more variables than the other. We looked at status as a Greek student, how many people live in your household. We have all these other variables to look at. And we're not rural Oregon, we're not Hawaii, we're not Australia. We're in a novel geographic setting, a lot like many other college campuses in the United States. So the next things we need to do are calculate the overall food insecurity scores, identify if there are associations between any of those important variables about who William Paterson College students are, and then make some recommendations. That's all I have in my 12 minutes. These are my student research assistants. I just wanted to give them a little bit of credit. They all helped in this project. And thank you. I think we'll have time for questions after.